Chapter 18. Notes.
Let's get to work.
Piped Diane. She reached into her pack and took out several explosive charges. They fit snugly in her fist and looked like a ball that had been cut in half. On the rounded end, a lifeless light indicated the charge hadn't yet been armed. The flat end had a suction cup so that the explosive device could adhere to surfaces. She placed them on the glass tanks one by one. They stuck to the glass with a sucking sound, and the lights on the bombs flared to life.
Seth, stand guard while I set these up.
Diane ordered.
Yes, ma'am.
Seth huffed. He drew 2 of his revolvers and hoisted them at the ready. If anything burst forth from one of the tanks, the door, or a dark corner, he would be prepared to engage it. I left Diane and Seth to their work and wandered further into the laboratory. This room looked to be the last one, as there were not any more doors to enter. We were surrounded on all sides by sterile walls. I perused the tables to see if there was anything of interest hidden among the delicate scientific instruments. Petri dishes and glass flasks of varying sizes were scattered across the tables. The smallest was the size of my palm, while the largest would have required both hands for me to carry it. I brought my face closer for a better look and immediately regretted my decision. Inside each of the little glass prisons was a slice of pulsing flesh. I recoiled in horror at the sight of the future monsters, and I quickly moved to a different part of the lab. I bent down at the waist and scrutinized a set of test tubes. There were several test tubes filled to the top with red liquid labeled as Subject Alpha. Alongside them were a few test tubes labeled Subject Omega, similarly containing a red liquid, except that they were either mostly empty or simply stained red with the remnant of a past sample.
Come have a look at this.
John called me over, interrupting my investigation. While Diane and Seth got to work, I walked over to join John.
What did you find?
I asked.
Personnel files.
He replied. He pulled open a drawer of a filing cabinet. The drawer clunked open. It was heavy with folders, any of which could be about me, my squad, or my brother. I reached out my hand but hesitated. Anderson's words haunted me. I was afraid of what I might find out.
You should see what you can find. Knowing is better than not knowing. Wouldn't you agree?
John urged. He was right, of course. This is what I came back to the base for, after all. I thumbed through the files and shuffled through the papers. I opened a folder and was met by the picture of a chubby, red-faced man. The document detailed the man's various duties in the lab. Underneath the photo was the man's name, Dr. Gildo. This was a photo of the scientist that Anderson, or someone else, had used to make the eagle gorilla creature we fought in the warehouse. I tossed the file aside on top of the growing pile to my left. I continued searching through the stack of papers. Neither I, my brother, nor the names of my squad mates were among the files here. I didn't know any of the other people named in the files. While it was impossible for me to know everyone stationed at the military base, I was surprised that I didn't recognize at least a few of the other names.
There's nothing here,
I said shakily. I slammed the drawer shut.
There isn't anything here about my brother,
I sobbed.
You don't know any of the people named here?
Asked John, raising an eyebrow.
No,
I mumbled. A sense of hopelessness was rising up inside me. We'd made such steady progress so far. To not be rewarded with any information was a real blow.
We aren't finished here yet. We still might run across something.
John comforted. He tapped his finger on a stack of papers on the desk.
In the meantime, I wanted to get your thoughts on these. Have a look.
He moved to the side to let me examine the hefty pile of notes. I shuffled through the documents. There were drawings, numbers, and formulas I didn't understand, but that wasn't the only thing scribbled on the papers. There were names of towns and cities that I recognized, along with small maps with those places circled on them. On an attached piece of paper, there were troop movements and radio communication transcripts detailing attacks and defensive maneuvers. I pulled out the small selection of notes and maps and placed them off to the side in front of John.
These operations already happened.
I pointed to the towns and then to our current location at Fort Romekin.
These towns were within spitting distance of the fort,
I explained.
Were?
John pressed.
They probably don't exist anymore. Most of the men were conscripted and the women and children were evacuated elsewhere.
I started. I hesitated for a moment, realizing that what I said probably wasn't true. What had probably happened was that the innocent people we supposedly helped were actually fed to the laboratory. I had already learned that the twisted science they were practicing here in the base required a steady supply of flesh, bones, and blood.
At least I thought they were evacuated.
I corrected myself.
I didn't know.
You didn't know.
John repeated.
But we're going to do what we can to correct the course.
John reassured. I went back to thumbing through the papers. It was more of the same, just documents about past troop movements and their results. Near the bottom of the stack was something different. It was a blueprint of one of the creatures, the wolf-like monster we fought at one of the fort's outer walls. The drawing read like specifications. It had the parts of the beast labeled, along with the dimensions of the creature. Directly below the drawing was a description of its purpose. The description read that this particular creation was intended to work in packs and harass enemy supply lines. At the bottom of the drawing were what you would call the ingredients to construct the monstrosities. It listed off the animal parts, along with blood from something called subject alpha. That means that the red liquid in the vials must have been blood from whatever subject alpha was. I continued to thumb through the notes. I found another blueprint that looked like the eagle monster that Seth beheaded in the warehouse. It also had a drawing and ingredient list, but this time the specs called for the blood of subject Omega. That blood sample was the one in the empty or mostly empty vials I saw a moment ago. Whatever subject Omega was, they had either drained it dry or killed it since they were almost out of samples. Curiously, there was a diagram of a creature I hadn't seen before. It was more human than beast, though it still required animal parts. Its component list required blood from subject alpha and subject omega, but also blood from a subject gamma. I hadn't seen any vials labeled subject gamma, though. Before I had too much time to dwell on it, John looked over my shoulder.
Find anything?
He inquired. I handed the papers to John.
I can't decipher all of this, but it looks like they're notes on how to create some of our friends from earlier.
I said.
Do you want them?
I asked him. John shook his head.
We don't want any of it. We're here to destroy all of this.
He tossed the paper back on the top of the pile with the other notes.
All done?
Diane exclaimed cheerily. The room was covered in remote bombs, their bright lights twinkling like tiny red stars.
Here, catch!
Diane chirped. She threw something, and it arced through the air toward me. I caught it. It was a small device with a bright pink button on the top.
Careful, that's the detonator.
Chirped Diane.
Press that button and this will all be blown sky high.
Maybe you shouldn't throw things that have the potential to kill all of us.
I scolded.
Probably, but I trust you.
Diane shrugged.
Are we done?
Seth complained.
Yes, we're done. We just need to get out of here so we can safely detonate the bombs.
Said Diane. She walked back over to the tank, whose inhabitant had only moments ago been slamming its clawed hand against the glass.
Sorry, friend, but we're going to have to redecorate your house. I'm afraid it will make quite the mess.
She taunted. Whatever lived in the tank must have heard her, because the clawed hand reappeared from the depths and restarted its attack on the glass.
I think I made it mad,
said Diane, amused. She stuck out her tongue at the hand flailing against the glass. A thin crack crept across the glass, then another, then another.
Did you have to rile it back up?
Hissed Seth.
Now we have to deal with another one of those things.
John turned to Diane.
You seem pretty confident. Do you want to handle this one on your own?
He sighed.
It's in my nature to gloat. You know that.
Diane sniffed. The cracks grew in number and size as the thing in the tank continued to struggle against the thick glass.
We don't have a lot of room to maneuver in here. Get behind the table and prepare to fire when the glass breaks.
I barked. I slid over the table and raised my weapon, ready to fire when the glass inevitably shattered and released the creature. John, Seth, and Diane joined me on the other side of the table. John drew his rifle, Diane readied her submachine gun, and Seth aimed his 2 revolvers at the tank. Liquid was beginning to spring out through the cracks in the tank. The glass shattered and the tank's contents gushed out onto the floor. A medical smell permeated the air and burned my nose. A body rode the wave out, but it wasn't like the monsters we had fought so far. The body looked mostly human, except for that clawed hand attached to an unnaturally long arm. Besides the arm, it looked to be an ordinary man dressed in something resembling a wetsuit.
Hold your fire,
I sputtered, holding up a hand.
That's different.
Purred Diane. I ran back around the table to the side of the man. He was face down and still, though his monstrous arm twitched and spasmed with each breath he took. I touched the man's back and shook him gently.
Hey, can you hear me?
I said slowly. The man didn't stir or answer.
Careful, Rosid.
John cautioned. I tried to flip the man over, but he was heavy.
Help me roll him over.
I grunted. Seth sighed in annoyance, but he came around the table and knelt down beside me. Together, we flipped the man over. I gasped. The man was roughly my age. A mop of untidy brown hair topped his head. He had a scar above his lip. This man was my missing brother.